I don't know about you guys, but my favorite style of deck is a control-based deck because I think control-based decks promote a lot of back and forth between duelists that other styles of decks don't really promote. A lot of decks get really degenerate and kind of can just promote like, you be over there while I do my thing and then I'll win. And that's where a lot of decks go. We see FTKs are like the best example for that, the most clear. But like combo decks too, just kind of say like, don't, as long as you don't interrupt me, I'm just going to do my thing and win. And there's not a lot of interaction going on there. Whereas control decks are built all around kind of just a back and forth. And you don't do as much for your board, but you still try and halt your opponent's stuff to keep them, whatever theirs is just lesser than what you have. That's kind of how that works there. So there is a nice back and forth, and I think it's the healthiest style of deck to play, and I think it's the most fun just because of the interactions are there that aren't there with other decks. So what I have here today are 5 decks that I think are fun, good control type decks that can actually be fairly viable in 2018, where we're at now in the game. So before I jump into this, and you already see what the first one is, of course, right here. I want to go through this and say there's a lot of control decks right now in the meta, and that's really cool. I love that. But I think there are other decks that can still do some pretty dangerous things. So like so don't worry about Altergeist. They're a very good deck, a top 5 deck, and they're a control-based deck as well. Frog, Paleos, Sky Strikers, Thunder Dragons. Thunder Dragons are like a weird combo / control deck, but yeah, they still control the board by not letting you surge, and they do have aspects of control. So there, and then True Draco, which have fallen off the map because they absolutely get dunked on by Thunder Dragons, and Thunder Dragons are decently represented and is just underpowered versus all the other ones. But still, those 5 I'm going to leave out just because, like, we already know about them. Like, you don't need me to tell you. Go to any YouTube channel doing top 5, top 10 decks of the format, and almost all those decks will be there. So I have 5 decks outside of those top 10 decks that are fun, controlled decks that can still be, competent in this current day, in this current meta. So first deck right here is Weather Painters. This is a really cool deck. I love this deck a lot. I love the artwork. This is a very biased list, by the way. I mean, I don't know as much about other control style decks, but these decks are the ones that I have played, and I know firsthand that they can do things that can give a lot of decks in the meta trouble. So, and Weather Painters are one of them, especially with the new ban list coming out. We see the combo decks got hit a lot. Firewall goes away, Malicious down to 2, Armageddon Knight down to 1. We see a lot of those combo decks getting hit there. So opening the door for a deck like this. So Weather Painters is a very, very kind of slow deck where you don't really do a ton of special summoning outside of your normal summon, but all the spell and trap cards banish or allow your Weather Painters to banish themselves to gain effects, and then the Weather Painters special summon themselves back to the field during the next standby phase. So you kind of use that to dodge any kind of effect, to gain an effect, and then you'll just get them back on the next turn. So the longer the duel goes on, you're just going to have more and more and more Weather Painters until you just have a huge, huge board, and as long as you were able to stun your opponent while you were doing it, you're going to be sitting pretty well. So with those combo decks getting hit on this last ban list, a lot of Yugioh, a lot of the meta looks like a ton of control decks, which this deck can work with because those are slower. So if they're slower and this deck just keeps going and going and going, you keep dodging with your spells and traps and banishing them and getting them back, then eventually you're going to have a board with 6 Weather Painters and you can't lose at that point. So keep those in mind. This is like their best starter card. This is their best searcher. Just adds a Weather Painter card from deck to hand. This allows you to remove if a Weather Painter you battle or you control battles an opponent's monster, you can just bounce that. It's non-targeting, non-destruction removal. Gotta love that. And then their wing condition, which is Weather Painter Rainbow, where she can banish Weather Painters she points at to negate any card effect. And if you can set her up pointing at 3 Weather Painters, you just win the duel because you have 3 negates a turn. And no deck can play through that. It's almost impossible. So Second deck here is Magical Musketeers. So these decks kind of went hand in hand. They got released at the same time. Everybody was all competitive over which deck's better. I think this one's better. I think this one's better. They're both solid. I think they didn't live up to what their hype was, but I do think they are pretty solid control decks that do their own thing in very different ways. So the way Magical Musketeers work is that all the Magical Musketeers say you can use the Magical Musket spell and traps directly from your hand as long as they're on the field. Then they all have a secondary effect where if once per turn, if a spell or trap is activated in their column, you gain an additional effect. So Caspar here is your main monster. He gets a search every time a spell or trap is activated in his zone. And yeah, so that's pretty much it there. This is another deck that does not really special summon a ton outside of the normal summon, but it can, especially with the new Link monsters we'll get to in a second. So we have, this is like the best, these are the two like best Magical Musket cards. This card negates monster effects and makes that monster 0 attack, 0 defense, and Last Stand negates a spell or trap. So as you can see, pretty strong stun cards. I mean, just 2 straight up negation cards for either. There are other cards too that buff your Magical Musketeers. There's a card that banishes stuff from your opponent's graveyard. There's one that just pops a card on the field. Like, you have really good disruption. So this deck is kind of like normal summon a Magical Musketeer and then hopefully have 3 or 4 hand traps essentially in the hand, and your opponent just hopefully can't deal with that too well. And then we have the new Link monster that got announced very recently but is not out yet. I still think the deck is very playable right now. It's just this card is not out, and this card helps you go second. It pretty much gains you advantage when it's Link Summon. It's a Link 1, it's very easy to get out, and it's only really good going second or after your turn 1. But yeah, so that'll be a nice little buff to the deck when it does come out. But for now, I mean, still, we've seen hand traps be dominant, and this deck essentially has like 20 hand traps in it, so it can be really, really tough for opponents to play through this stuff. My third deck here is Monarchs. This is a deck I don't have the most experience with, but any deck with the ability to lock your opponent out of the extra deck is always going to be relevant in turn, maybe not relevant, but always going to be capable of beating any deck in the meta, because we've seen now that currently, like, what are the top 5 decks? Like Sky Striker, Thunder Dragon, Altergeist, I don't know, Trickstar, or Burning Abyss, and like the Dark Warriors. Like, the only deck that does not use the extra deck is like literally just Altergeist, right? Yeah, every single deck pretty much uses the extra deck exclusively, and should you be able to lock them out of the extra deck, they may not be able to play at all. And they have just some pretty cards. They put up a big beat stick, and then they make it so your opponent can't use the extra deck. And a lot of decks just don't have outs in the main deck like that, especially combo decks. They have cards with decent removal. Kuraz can bounce 2 cards, right? Destroy 2 cards on the field, and yeah, so you have ways to out cards. Domain is insanely powerful. This is the card that keeps your opponent from using the extra deck. Yeah, that's just an insane win condition. There are other good stun cards there. Pantheism is an incredibly good kind of just search card that the deck has access to. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't have the most practice with a deck like this. I know somebody very close to me who does play the deck. Shout out to you, Mike. You're the boy. But overall, yeah, it's a cool deck, and any deck that locks your opponent out of the extra deck has a chance to beat pretty much anything meta relevant. There. Then we have Ninjas. This is a very personal deck to me. This is like one of my favorite decks of all time, possibly my favorite deck of all time. It's my only deck profile I've uploaded up until this point, and it's very underrated. I think people kind of just underrate it, even with the new support, because they scoff at it, because with the early Ninja support and the Ninja's cards we've gotten over time have just all been like, ugh. Like, we got Hanzo, and Hanzo was great. The Twilight Ninjas are okay, and other stuff, but we actually got some pretty good support recently. After Hanzo, we got like Yellow Ninja's very, very good. Hidden Village Ninjutsu R is a very good protection card that the deck sorely, sorely needed, because any kind of back row removal could just kind of dismantle your entire strategy, but this card protects your back row, which is really, really nice and needed. You also have a powerful stun card, another pseudo extra link card that just says you can banish an opponent's monster, and then that zone can't be used. So you take up one zone, you banish their monster in the other zone, and then the extra deck is pretty much off limits to your opponent. And so yeah, this can be a pseudo win condition right here, and just win you games right out the gate. We also have a powerful, powerful link monster that once per turn just sets any Ninjutsu R card straight from the deck. Very, very powerful, just +1 every single turn. So nobody can sleep on this card or you'll get punished. It also protects itself really well. But yeah, I mean, forget the lock version. The lockdown version is like poop. Version's terrible. Don't play that version. Play like the like control / like sort of combo. It's not even really like combo. Like, it's a really short combo. But yeah, the deck can explode and it controls the board fairly well. And yeah, I think the Ninja Engine's actually pretty decent. So don't sleep on it. And I think we do have future Ninja Sport coming. I don't know when. I don't know how. I don't know where. I just believe that it's coming. I think the door is open. After Shadows of Valhalla, I was like, oh shit, you know, get some new stuff. Anyway, we're going to move to the last deck here, which is Lair of Darkness. This is another deck I've played. Literally, I'm like building 4 out of these 5 decks, everything but Monarchs. I'm building myself because like I told you, I'm a control player, and a lot of these decks kind of call to me, and I think they're pretty good. I think they can definitely compete with a lot of meta decks. And Lair of Darkness is no exception. In fact, it might be the best competitively out of all 5 of the decks we've gone over here. The biggest problem for the deck, obviously, is that like in duels where you do not see Lair, you can very much so struggle. And that's pretty much it. That's the main thing. So pretty much, if you don't know what Lair of Darkness does, it changes all monsters on the field to dark. And then once per turn, if you attribute a dark monster to activate an effect, you can tribute a monster your opponent controls instead, as long as it's dark, which it will be because it makes everything dark. So pretty much what you do is you tribute your opponent's monsters as cost, which is like the best removal that's ever existed, because even monsters that are unaffected by card effects can still be removed with this. So you could literally like remove Rongo Miniad with this. I mean, if you were able to summon before he like kept you from not summoning, you could literally tribute him, because even if he's unaffected by card effects, you can just tribute him as cost, and cost does not count as targeting, like using an effect on him, essentially. So it pretty much outs any monster, and you also can gain tokens after you already go through tributing stuff, which is really, really cool. The deck also uses like can also be really good with Artifact Sanctum, just because Scythe is so good locking your opponent out of the extra deck for a turn. And this card can be turboed out with Lilith. Lilith says tribute a dark monster on the field. Quick effect. That's a quick effect, by the way. To reveal 3 normal traps in your deck, add 1 or set 1 directly to the field and shuffle the rest back into the deck. So she can quick effect, as long as Lair's on the field, tribute your opponent's monster to set a Sanctum and lock them out of the extra deck from there. It's insanely, insanely powerful. And she's like the best card in the deck other than Lair. And yeah, so, and again, another deck that can lock your opponent out of the extra. This is what you need to do against those faster decks, really, to like keep them at bay. And then you have your boss monster, Darkest Diabolos. He's a 3,000 beater. When you tribute a dark monster, you special summon him from hand or grave, and he's pretty much just a 3,000 beat stick that can't be targeted or tributed. And yeah, it's really hard to deal with. So this is probably the best deck out of these. I think a lot of them are good. These aren't necessarily in order per se. These are just 5 decks. I think if you are looking at building a control deck because you don't like all the combo decks, they're kind of boring, then once you know your combo, you kind of play the same duel every single way, whereas these decks have more variation with the back and forth between you and your opponent. And I agree, if that's what you're thinking, because these 5 decks are all really cool to me. Like I said, I'm building 4 of them, and maybe you should consider building one of them yourself, or multiple. So let me know what if there are any control decks you guys think are like underrated and, you know, should be seen more, you know, even on like just the regional level and being played. But let me know down below. And if you like this video, subscribe for more stuff from me. And yeah, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna go. gonna be, yeah, I'm gonna